Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the How Round Is Your Roti podcast. Today, I have with me Ananya, who is a South Asian breathwork and meditation facilitator with a PhD in reproductive biology. She offers trauma informed breathwork workshops, coaching, and resources for both individuals and workplaces to prevent stress and anxiety, but also now, particularly for those navigating miscarriage and pregnancy after loss. So, hi, Ananya. Great to have you on the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Priya.
So it sounds like you started off with a very scientific background. What got you into breathwork and meditation?
So I definitely have a scientific background, but I always I've been quite exposed to breath work from a young age, from family, from my grandparents, really. My maternal grandfather was very devoted into Kriya yoga. My grandma on my dad's side was really into meditation and breath work, pranayama, but as a little kid, I wasn't really interested. So my grandma would always, want to involve me in meditation. She'd say, "Oh, I'm going to meditate now. You can do it too." It just sounded really boring when I was little. Why do I want to sit and and think of nothing or, try and sit with my thoughts? It just didn't really appeal to me. So although it was very much around during childhood, I never really mm, turned to it until later in my 20s when actually those two grandparents passed. And so during that bereavement phase, it was just in the grief of it that I intuitively turned to pranayama, breathwork, all of those things because I was at a loss. I didn't know how to cope because often in South Asian communities, we don't know how to deal with grief. We don't get taught how to deal with big emotions. And because it was happening on both sides, my mother was grieving her father, my dad was grieving his mother. We were all in this just state of grief and not really knowing how to process it. So for me, I needed to turn to something, and that ended up being breathwork and pranayama practice to really helped me shift and process all of that emotion and everything that was coming up. And then later, it was the tool that really helped me move through pregnancy loss afterwards as well. So yeah, it's been there as a tool, but really only I think there's a quote that is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that's kind of how it was for me.
Did you find when you came back to it in your 20s, did you go back to what your grandparents taught you, or did you find other avenues to learn about it again, perhaps differently than what you were taught, or was it quite
Mm.
similar?
Yeah, I turned to Kriya Yoga initially, mainly because that was my link to my grandfather to feel connected to him. And so it almost helped me process the grief and also find spiritual meaning, I guess, in his passing. And then the other kind of things I turned to were Kundalini yoga as well as yoga as well. And then later, only a couple of years ago, I also trained properly to become more certified just because I found it so interesting. As I went through all my scientific training, academic research as well, I really fell in love with learning all the science and the neuroscience behind it and how it can affect everything as well. So I wanted to have more of a kind of robust foundational training as well in it for myself. Mainly at that point, I didn't really think I was going to use it to help other people. It was more as a passion and learning for myself. But then what's ended up happening is that not only as I've gone deeper in my practice, it's helped me realize and use it in different avenues in my own life. And then I found it to be really useful in other aspects. And that's kind of why or how I use it, in workplace settings where so many employees are stressed and struggling with anxiety. And it's not only can it help in that sense, but breathwork is so versatile that I've found it helping in traumatic settings where we want to process grief, but also in the everyday as well, when we just need some time to pause and allow ourselves some space.
And as someone perhaps a bit like me, who's a complete novice to breath work, I do a small practice of yoga, but they seem to be quite interlinked,
Mm.
the two, breath work and yoga. So I want to know a little bit more about, you mentioned different types of yoga there as well. I didn't quite catch, but would you say there's benefits to having different types of yoga in your toolkit?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think the other thing is it's like anything, it's not prescriptive. How I see things is not one modality will necessarily be the one thing for an individual. It might be that we come to certain things, a certain type of yoga in one season of life, and like exactly for myself. And then we might return to it later as well, depending on our situation, depending on our experiences. So um, for me, it was a combination of all three that I turned to, and I still turn to. But as a as someone, if anyone is new to it, I would encourage or invite you to just any opportunity that you see a breathwork class maybe or yoga class is to try it out and be open-minded to see what works for you in that time, because maybe one might work for you right now and then later you turn to a different one. It's when I go into workplaces and I speak about breathwork, different types of breathwork especially, there's a lot of the kind of beginner practices that we might a bit more common, I say commonplace, that we might already be exposed to. And then there are more advanced techniques which they're really important to do with someone that is maybe trauma informed, because they might bring up more emotion that needs to be done in a safe setting. So yeah, I would encourage, if anyone is interested in learning more about it, be exposed and be open to learning more about each different one.
You mentioned there with your scientific hat on that it had, benefits in neuroscience. Can you share a little bit more about what that was?
Yeah, so I think what's amazing is how much breathwork can affect us, but also when so the breathing essentially is controlled by our autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system controls heart rate, blood pressure, and digestion. And so when we're stressed, our breathing becomes shallower. We get less oxygen that enters the bloodstream, and our body goes into heightened fight or flight responses. Whereas if we can use the breath, and this is where again breathing techniques, breathwork, pranayama, they're quite versatile. So what we can do is we can activate the parasympathetic response, which decreases heart rate. It activates the rest and digest response, and it stimulates the vagus nerve. And in those states, the vagus, basically the vagus nerve carries signals between the brain, the heart, and digestive systems. And so what we can do by activating the parasympathetic nervous system is that we get to regulate the stress response, and it so there's research to suggest that um, by activating this parasympathetic response, it helps us regulate the stress response, and this has also been linked to improving symptoms of IBS, chronic inflammation, PTSD as well. And so that's amazing to take as as knowledge, and then we can then apply it into our everyday lives. But what is fascinating is to also see when we meditate and or practice breathwork, there's some neuroimaging data um, that has shown to alter the brain structure. So prefrontal cortex, which is involved in processing complex information, abstract information, the hippocampus, so the memory and facilitating emotional responses, also just our regulation of emotions as well. So there's definitely data around it as well, and also there's more to come. Like a lot of this is, still preliminary, but with all things, I think having a research background as well, you realize that actually to do all of this research takes so much time, and often I invite people to, you might be waiting for all the evidence-based research, and that's great, and I'm a scientist as well, and I want that, and we get to try it out for ourselves as well. So does trying this breathwork practice help you in your everyday? How do you feel after you've done that practice as well? So, yeah.
I think it's interesting because obviously in South Asia, where yoga, the breathwork practices all started, and like you said, your grandparents were teaching you. It comes down generation to generation, and they found the
Mm,
benefit for hundreds of years. If they've carried it on, they know the
yeah,
benefits. But I
yeah,
suppose living in a Western country, we're a bit more scientifically minded, and we want some evidence to back it up as well. And it's
absolutely.
nice to see that the evidence is there, but also there is that generational experience that our grandparents knew it was good for us, and as you've
Yeah,
shown, it's something that you've come back to as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's really really great to hear that there are two sides there that we can take. For someone who was just starting with breath work, because that sounded like there's a whole list of benefits you just reeled off, and I was like, okay, maybe this is something I really need to try. How would you say to someone if they just wanted, if they've got maybe 5-10 minutes, would that be enough? Because I know as busy moms, we're both busy moms, like how to incorporate that into daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I go into workplace settings, and because I've been in that space as well, I'll give all of the background, and then I'll say, this is how you do it when, you've got your manager on Teams kind of messaging you and you've got a deadline, and how do you do it in that space? Because not everyone will have 30 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day or even that time. So there's definitely so many different things that you can do. And also in a workplace setting, you might not want people to know that you're doing a practice, but you can do that without anyone knowing. One of the easiest and things that I do all the time is essentially if our exhalation is longer than our inhalation, it activates the parasympathetic response. So even if you're inhaling for 4 and then breathing out for 8, you're still activating that parasympathetic response, and you can do that at your desk. You can do it, 1 to 2 minutes if you have access. And sometimes I'll, encourage people to, you can go to the toilet. Hopefully everyone's, I know everyone's busy, but hopefully you've got enough time to go to the loo, um, and stick on your headphones for one, maybe the time of the duration of one song that helps you feel good, and go and breathe for the length of that song. Or if you have a longer period of time, go outside into nature if you can and breathe there. I think when I facilitate, workshops or do coaching through it, we often we can always start with something. So like the box breathing, samaviti pranayama. So that's equal ratio breathing. So I think a lot of us will probably be aware of it already, but it's the breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, and then holding for 4. And that again, just it can be an easy, simple, quick practice just for the length of a song or 5 minutes. My practice now with a young baby is very different to how it used to be. And I don't have time to, I mean, sometimes I don't have time to go to the toilet by myself, but um, in those moments, it's usually just me walking with the baby and practicing the breathing because that's the only time I'll get. But I notice the difference if I don't do it. So therefore, I will try and do it however way, and that it gets to look different. So,
Definitely. Now I remember the early motherhood stages where it's just trying to fit everything into the day. So it's great to know that even just a few minutes can make a difference. I think it's something I want to try with my daughters as well. I think
mm,
actually, if the younger they start, it might be something they come back to, like you did when
hmm
you're older. So I mentioned in the beginning, Ananya, about your support for women after miscarriage and pregnancy after loss. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for myself, I went through pregnancy loss and I just again, it's one of those things that isn't talked about much in South Asian communities. There's a lot of there are a lot of myths that came about that we get said, we hear, we're told, and all of that. It was a deeper layer of not really knowing how to process the grief for myself, processing the emotion. And so when I turned to breath work, it helped me through the grief stage. It also helped me a lot of, and I know this is quite common for people that have experienced a loss, is there comes a point where you lose a bit of trust in your own body, in what it can do, um, and it was really important for me to find ways to trust my body again, and that's how I support women now as well. It's through the grief stage of processing that emotion, um, allowing and meeting them where they're at, because everyone will be in a different situation, experience, mindset around it as well. And then supporting them through learning how to feel safe again within their body at this stage without looking to the future, just being in this moment right now. And that's where breathwork can really, really help ground, and feel safe, and then slowly rebuild trust within the body. So that is something that I feel really passionate about as well, because I have the scientific background. I have now, quite a solid breathwork and meditation practice for myself, but I've also seen how versatile it can be and how it can help through the different stages of pregnancy, loss, grief, the conception journey. And then also there's a lot of anxiety that can come up with pregnancy after a loss as well. We had some scares during that time. I used breath work for each stage of that, every scan appointment, every time I went to the bathroom, because you're scared that you will be bleeding and that might be something. And that did happen a couple of times, and moving through that, being in a place where you can allow the breath to help you ground in that moment, calm the anxiety that does come up, um, and also stay grounded within yourself and your own choices, because it's such a personal journey for the individual and or with a partner, um, from conception to having the baby as well. It's found it to be such a helpful tool and such an important tool. Not to say, obviously, there's nuance here, and to caveat, as I said before, breathwork can definitely help um, so many people, but also it might not be the one thing that helps or supports. And I definitely encourage people to be open to different avenues of what can help. Because in my journey, I did counseling, I did the journaling, I reached out to support groups. I needed to find all those things and try all those things. And the thing for me personally that really helped me come back to myself, come back to my intuition, was breathwork. So that's why I feel so passionate about it, because breathwork, ultimately, it's not a luxury. It's not reserved for just a few people, or an expensive retreat. We all have
Yeah.
access to it. Um, we all have access to it, and therefore, if I can share something or the tools that have helped me along this journey, then it would be it's so important and so amazing for other people to find that as well. Whether that's the thing, or whether it's just a stepping stone for them to find the next thing that will help them in their journey, or whatever season they're in.
It definitely sounds as if it's an important tool to have with you. And like you said, there are lots of different therapies out there, there's support groups, but having something like this, it's free, is relatively easy, it can have such an impact on life. So why not try and see if it works out for you? I'm definitely taking that away from this conversation. And if someone was going through that loss at the moment, that stage, where would you say they should start with the breath work or meditation or even yoga, if they wanted to find something within themselves to try and heal?
So I actually have some free resources that people can download if they are, needing something in this moment or they're new to this work. I have a couple of so there's one that's is more general, but it will definitely help uh, for feeling more calm, confident, and grounded. And there's a breathwork audio that goes with it. There's a breathwork cheat sheet with prompts and affirmations for that. And then there's specifically um, something that I created because I needed this during that time. I wanted to provide some resources for navigating the grief, um, returning to the body and feeling safe within that. So there's a breathwork bundle with 3 free audios, one for, grief has a rhythm. There's one that's called You're Safe, and there's one Returning to the Body, which is really about rebuilding the trust within your body. All things that I needed and kind of independently did for myself to navigate the loss. But then also I turned to that during the pregnancy after the loss as well, because in each moment, and I think that's the thing, it's not prescriptive. So it's not I must tick it off every day. It's just meeting you where you're at in that moment or in that day. You might be feeling more grief, and that's, grief and healing isn't linear, it's a process. So one day you might feel as though you are you're finding it really, really difficult and it's impossible to move through. I've had that. And then the next day you think, oh, okay, I can do this, and I want to tap into my body, and I want to, um, you know, learn a little bit more about trusting it and following my intuition, or following those intuitive nudges, which we all have. It's just a lot of the time the trauma can mask those intuitive nudges that we all have. But ultimately our body's always communicating with us. And it's it's great that, the topic of trauma is coming up in conversations a lot more. There's the body keeps score, when the body says no, all these books and resources. And so we're understanding that when we don't move the grief through, it gets, the emotion gets stuck, and then it can manifest as dis-ease in the body or disease in the body, and it can contribute to different other ailments and conditions. So yeah, to be able to have access to tools to help, I think is so important.
Definitely. And like you said, it's such an individual process. People will have different ways of dealing with that, but coming back to yourself and how
Mm.
your body's feeling, how you're feeling mentally, and finding different ways to cope with it that are healthy, I think is definitely one of the best things you can do for yourself. You mentioned that you went through that process of loss yourself, and and earlier we said in South Asian community it can be hard for people to understand grief or want to talk about grief. It's quickly gets swept under the carpet. What was that process like for you?
Honestly, I think it was a bit of a shock, a lot of the comments I received. Um, Closest family were very supportive, and I think at a time where I wasn't made to feel well, I think having the scientific background, I was really passionate about not about sharing it as well, because I kind of knew going into pregnancy how common miscarriage was. That wasn't actually, you know, I knew that. It was more than when I heard comments like, you know, did you lift something heavy? Were you what were you doing to sort of cause it, I guess, which I found quite problematic, especially knowing that, you know, in those early stages, pre 12 weeks, or the early stages of pregnancy, miscarriage, pregnancy loss is very common. And often there might be some genetic factors, but in those stages, it's hard to pinpoint one specific cause in those early stages of pregnancy loss. And so to receive comments like that, or just for a lot of the, yeah, for it to be kind of turned upon, I felt like I needed to address those. I needed to address the myths with a scientific hat on and say, no, well, actually, this isn't what you're saying isn't true. And it also, it affects the people that are receiving these comments as well. So I think right now I'm actually kind of making a series around the kind of the myths and the truths behind pregnancy loss, because just as a way to tackle them, tackle the taboos as well, because our loss was an early loss, and there's definitely in society in general, but definitely in the South Asian community, I think there's a um want and a desire to just kind of move on from one loss. Oh, it's going to be fine next time though. And when we were pregnant the next time, it'll be fine this time. You don't know, and you don't have that certainty. You almost need to be so grounded in yourself to be okay with the outcome. And that, you know, for such a wanted pregnancy is really difficult to detach yourself from. Um, but it's also important to understand, for how I like to call it in my community, but the aunties, and for anyone, I mean, I think most people listening
Yeah.
are South Asian to this podcast, but for anyone that's
Yes.
not, the aunties might not mean your actual aunties, because that's great,
Amazing.
probably. But it's the wider society, to all those people that, have the opinions and will say something to your face, and then behind your back will say something else. We all know.
Yeah.
um, so it's how you show up in front of those aunties when they say, "Oh, at least it was an early loss. At least, it was only one, say." But, there's research to show that even having an early loss, um, can increase the risk of depression, anxiety, PTSD. So it's these things that, are evidence-based as research now to show that. And it's something that anyone that's experiencing that loss will also know, because their body is telling them that, no, this is a traumatic response for me, and I have to figure out how to process it. So,
Well, I just want to say I'm really sorry to hear about your loss. I think the work you're doing now, and you're able now to talk about it so openly as well, which I really appreciate, because for a lot of women who have experienced losses, they'll hold it in and they'll keep it to themselves. And I think because we have a society based around shame and judgment from those aunties or whoever it may be, that tendency to hold it in and keep it can be really detrimental to mental health. So I personally think you're very brave in coming on and speaking so openly about it, because I think the more that we do that, the easier it is for women that are going through it, and perhaps they won't
mhm,
feel so alone. And
mm,
also, I think coming out with some of those myth busting evidence will be really great as well. I mean, you've got the PhD in reproductive biology there, so you've got evidence mindset and things to support you and others. So I think that'll all be really helpful. And all the resources that you spoke about too, I will, if you've got links to them, I'm happy to share it with the audience, with anyone listening. I think that would be a tremendous support for people wanting to know more information about breathwork, how to start breathwork, because it sounds like it's been so impactful in your life. And like we said, it's just it's another tool to try. So why not give it a go? But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I feel like I've learned quite a lot about yoga, the different types of yoga and meditation and breath work. And it's definitely encouraged me to give it a go. And hopefully with my daughters as well, I think starting a practice at any age can be really beneficial. So thank you, Ananya, again.
thank you so much for having me, Priya.